Here's Pat and Ray.
And we're here with the challenger for the Kane County State's Attorney's Office race, Mr. Andrew Sosnowski. We want to thank you for coming, giving us your time. We appreciate that. Ray is here. He's excited to meet you. I, of course, have known you, and we talked about that a little bit. Stay away from the table, you're telling me, Kevin? Thank you. First thing we wanted to do for the people that don't necessarily know who you are is to give the people a little bit of your background, your past employment history, your educational background, and of course any websites you might have where people can just take their time and lollygag through your vast curriculum vitae.
Well, very nice. So first of all, thank you very much, Pat, for having me, and Ray. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to talk to your audience, and I hope I can inform them. My name is Andrew Sosnowski. My website is sosnowskiforkane.com. I've been an attorney for 35 years. I graduated from law school in 1989, so that makes it 35 years. And I've done a lot in that 35 years. I would say probably half of that, though, I've been involved in some kind of prosecution. I also include my time as Deputy General Counsel of DCFS in the prosecution element because I was prosecuting cases for DCFS, mostly child abuse cases around the state of Illinois. I've probably prosecuted in probably 60 of the 102 counties we have in the state of Illinois in some capacity or another. But mainly, as far as a prosecuted with actual caseload, I've been in Kane County, where I was there for about a little over 8 years. Had the fortune of working with Pat, and I'm saying that very, very truly because he was one of those persons we all looked up to in the office. He had a lot of experience and was always willing to give that to everybody there. And that's what you need in a prosecutor's office, that experience to give the young prosecutors something to look at and to emulate. So we had that opportunity. I also prosecuted in McHenry County up north, also in Joe Davis County way out west in Galena, and rounding it out, I was in Ogle County in Oregon, Illinois. Those last assignments, Oregon and Ogle, I did a lot of prosecution of their high criminal cases. These were young prosecutors that were just elected. They didn't have any experience. They said, "Can you come out and help us?" And I did work for them. I did several murders, sexual assault cases. I remember one huge pornography case, cases like that, and also civil cases. I was appearing for they were trying to do windmills out in Galena. I remember appearing at the county board for those hearings.
Were you pro or against windmills?
Probably at that time it was pretty new, the whole idea. So we were looking at scientific evidence to determine if it was going to kill the birds and was going to be this and that. So I remember just trying to be an arbiter of facts, bringing them in. At this point, I'm not even sure what I believe anymore. I think that electric energy is good, but it needs a lot of help.
Sure.
So the other thing I've done is the other crown jewel probably in my experience is I was the general counsel for the National Insurance Crime Bureau. The reason I bring that up is an organization that dealt with white-collar crime. It was mostly auto theft and high-level crimes of insurance. They were involving like the mafias. These were like Russian mafias that were coming from other countries. We would work with search warrants with police, Interpol, interstate police, FBI, CIA. So we had a lot of contacts with all those agencies. And I ran the legal services for the United States of America, all 50 states. We had lawyers in every state. We had cases in every state, as you can imagine. And it was a budget of about maybe $60 million that we did. And my specific department was about a little over 6.5, maybe something like that. Then I'm also a private lawyer. I have my own practice in Elgin. I have a little boutique practice, a couple paralegals, some interns that we use. And then rounding out that experience, thank goodness, I've been a teacher, adjunct professor at Elgin Community College for about 23 years now. I started in 2000, teaching criminal law. You did some of that. I remember that as well, Patrick. Criminal law, criminal justice, report writing for police officers, also both in the paralegal studies program and in the criminal justice program. And then most recently, I got an assignment at Aurora University as a full-time senior lecturer, they call it. They don't allow me to say professor because I don't have a PhD. I only have a JD, a Juris Doctor. You can't be a professor unless you have a JD. And I don't have unless you have a PhD, and I don't have a PhD.
That seems wrong, and we're going to work on that.
Yes, but I'm trying my best every day over there.
Andrew, you're the challenger, Republican challenger in
Yes,
this
sir.
particular case, and I guess the simple question is, what motivates you to challenge the incumbent state's attorney?
Well, I think, Ray, thank you for that question. I think it's a lot of this has to do with what I see happening in laws around the state of Illinois. And we're going to talk probably some more about that, like the advent of the Safety Act. And when I'm in classes, I talk to students. These are young kids, 20 years old, 19, 18, who want to be law enforcement officers. And we talk about prosecution. We talk about the old days of prosecution. We talk about the idea of holding people accountable. And we talk about also protecting our law enforcement. And these all want to be law enforcement officers. And a true story, one day, 2 kids come up to me after class and said, "Why don't you run as the state's attorney?" And I said, well, I've thought about that through my life. We all think about those things. You just want to, where you're going to pick up your bootstraps and do it. So I said, why don't you put me on the ballot? I was just kind of saying that. I went back up and wrote on the board. The next day, they're bringing petitions in and they're passing it around. They say, "Professor, we only have like 16 days or something to get you on the ballot." It was like late December or late November. So I said, go ahead. So we started doing that. The next thing I do, I contacted the party. So why am I running? It's number one, because there's an impetus behind the students were saying we need to do this. But number two, as you look around our communities, the climate and the fabric are changing. And I'm not saying that anybody's doing it purposely. It's not a big conspiracy theory, but you gradually see some things happening. And my children live in this county. My grandchildren live in this county. And a lot of friends and neighbors. And I said, we got to do something about it. I'm going to be 64 years old. Hey, this could be the last thing I do before I retire.
What would you do differently, at least in practice, with the programs that exist currently in the state's attorney's office? What might you do differently? Maybe a couple, 3 items that you would see as a challenger. And this is a campaign, so we can talk about differences. What would you do differently?
Well, probably number one, this is going to sound trite and it's going to sound funny, but it's really not. It's actually kind of pathetic. But I would actually try cases. The chief law enforcement prosecutor of the county, if you look at the statute, it's pretty clear. The statutory duties of a prosecutor is to prosecute cases. Wow, can you believe that? That's a huge confusion. Mm-hmm. And prosecuting cases means getting into court sometimes and prosecuting a case. And when you prosecute cases and you teach these young prosecutors how to prosecute and how to do cases, the offers or the ability to hold people accountable for crimes begins to go up. We saw that in our administration when we were there. The more you are aggressive about doing that, the more you hold people accountable for crimes. So that's number one. Number two is I would do a deep dive into a lot of the social justice programs that the state's attorney's office currently employs. Now, I'm not saying they're bad, so don't say, oh, they're horrible. But again, I think before off camera, Ray, you had mentioned statistics. And somebody, where are statistics? I can look at an 8x5 glossy and say, oh, we're doing such a great job. But the bottom line is when you get into the nitty gritty, there's really no details. And I would like to find out, are these programs really working? You could say all you want, and I've not seen any statistical data to say that diversion programs or what's happening now are truly working. You might have one guy, oh, he graduated, he's doing great. But I want to see statistical data to say that the money we're spending and employing is huge. The last thing I'd probably do is really look at the civil division. The civil division is it's unwatched. As prosecutors, everybody wants to come in and try the murder cases. We all like that. It's sexy, it's appealing, it has the most pump. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the civil division. And I've talked to civil division lawyers who are there right now, and there's some concerns. One example was just recently we had a First Amendment zone that the state's attorney...
We talked about that last week.
Yeah, and allegedly this First Amendment zone, and I just got into the facts on it. The First Amendment zone was created, but it was created by the state's attorney's office, and then afterwards the state's attorney said, well, I didn't mean that, I meant something. It was just a big confusion, like, well, who's on first? Right. Does the prosecutor know what's going on?
Actually, we talked to the chair and the Mr. Bell, her opponent, on that. Do you believe that people should be able to enter and exit county offices freely without interference?
Well, I believe that if anything obstructs an ability for a business to do their business, it's a concern.
All right.
And that's not protected by the First Amendment. I mean, that's
Right.
just ridiculous. So if something is affecting the ability of somebody to do their work,
Right.
you gotta employ some kind of.
And the follow-up to that is, actually, if there is a problem over there, whose responsibility is it to stop that problem?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's a collective, probably, decision, but it starts with just talking about the problem and solving it. And when you look at the chief, like what I would look at in my role, Ray, is I find that the state's attorney is the chief defense attorney for the county. So I represent the county board, I represent the chairman of the board, and I will do that. And one of the things my opponent says is, well, I can give them advice and they don't listen to the advice. Well, you know what? When I have clients that don't listen to my advice, you know what I say? Get another lawyer. And county board, here's the other lawyer you can get, because I'm ready to stand up and defend you and fight for you.
On that First Amendment issue, though, I don't want to belabor this point, but if there's some kind of confusion or whatever out front, and it causes a disturbance of some sort, at the end of the day, shouldn't the sheriff be taking care of that?
Yeah, the sheriff should. I mean, again, everybody has their role. I mean, if there is somebody truly violating a law, again, if there's something put up and somebody's going beyond it, the sheriff should probably get involved. If there's a breach of the peace and the ability of that goes to that level, then certainly the sheriff's going to get involved. But sometimes we kill ants with sledgehammers. So the big thing is take all the people in a room and talk about this and say, what can we do to, number one, preserve your rights and protect your ability to speak? Number two, keep our business flowing. Number three, allow people to do their work. It's when you sit down, you can solve these problems.
One last point on
Yes, sir.
this before we Pat's got some questions as well.
Of course.
And that is with respect to the office itself, and you outlined the fact that you were there a number of years ago. Mm-hmm. And you, as running for office, you've obviously done some study on the office and so on.
Yes, sir.
What differences exist today from when you were there?
Well, number one, the laws are completely different. There's changing laws all over the place, and a lot of these laws are mandates. That you have to do certain things, and there's grandfathered in, and you got certain things coming at certain times. So there's a legal climate that's different. But really, the bottom line is it's the same thing. You're trying to mitigate criminal activities. So the same thing that went back 100 years ago is going on today. You're trying to mitigate criminal activities. You find abhorrent behaviors, you make them criminal, and you want to hold people accountable so they don't do it again. So there's not a lot of change in philosophy as far as that's what you want to do. It's just a matter of how you're doing it. I think right now there's a lot of diversion programs. There's a lot of programs for second chance, maybe third chance, maybe fourth chance. I don't know enough about the programs, but I know there's an inordinate amount of money being spent. My opponent, for example, started with a budget of about $5 million, and I think it's 11 now, or maybe even 12. And that's in 3.5 years. That's an over doubling of a budget. That's kind of almost obscene.
If I may, she was here earlier, as I said, and she said her budget's 18. She came in at 10. That's what she said today.
That's one of her, and I don't have the actual numbers.
No, I understand.
So but even if that, let's say she's right, and it's 10 and it goes to 8, that's still almost doubling a budget. That's $8 million, and a lot of it's saying we have to pay for the Safety Act. Well, that's another whole story I'm going to get you. The taxpayers need to be concerned about these things, and public safety is number one. I mean, there's no money budget on public safety, but we got to do things smart.
I've known you long enough, and you've certainly laid out your background in terms of your prosecutorial history and tenure throughout the state. Mm-hmm. I would imagine you were always kind of a compassionate, empathetic type guy. You weren't, you didn't have foam at the mouth when you were a prosecutor. Some of this restorative justice, I think that you can understand where that comes from. But have they gone too far? And when I say they, maybe the progressive people in the Democratic Party or the office of the state's attorney in terms of some of these diversion programs.
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Pat. Back in the 90s when I was a prosecutor for juvenile justice, if you may recall, I was one of the authors of the Juvenile Court Act when they rehauled the act. And I brought restorative justice in there. Isn't that weird? Right. It was a concept that nobody talked about, but it was basically bringing the offender with the victim and the community and solving the problem. There's good with that. That's very good. I mean, I think that that's a good step. But like you said, has it gotten out of control? You know, sometimes I look at this, and which is one of the reasons, Ray, I'm involved in the campaign, is that the criminal justice system is kind of turning upside down on its head. You know, and the victims are secondary to the defendant. You know, we believe in the United States Constitution. I think we all do. And there's the 10 amendments to the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, which gave a plethora of rights to individuals to make sure they're not downtrodden and they're not subjected to punishments when they shouldn't. And there's a lot of laws that protect that. But now we're almost going even further on that. And, you know, there's victims' bills of rights, but it seems like victims are secondary. In my administration, that's another thing I would look at, is victims are number one. Now, that sounds like you're pandering to, no, we're not. I mean, a victim should be number one. What's going on? We don't want this to happen. That's why we have criminal justice, to prevent it from happening to other people. So yes, has it gone too far? And I'll tell you an example when we talk about the Safety Act. If you want to ask me that, I will.
Well, we'll get to that, I think, but going back to some of these restorative programs, I was pretty hard on Ms. Mosser as it relates to some of these programs because, you know, this pre-arrest diversion where we don't even want somebody to be booked, you know, God forbid, or some of these other programs. It seems as though we are spending a lot of time on the defendant and not so much time on the victim. And that seems to be at cross purpose for, you talked about the statute and what our duties and responsibilities are. It should be victim centric.
Let me quickly get in this before, I know you want to go to the referendum coming up, but we asked her the same question, so I'll ask you. We did this in all of our various interviews with opponents. We want to try to keep the campaign to be kind of mellow, and so I'll ask the question. Is there something good you want to tell the audience about your opponent?
Yes.
Something you like about her?
Well, I actually went on somebody sent me her website or something, and she has a beautiful picture of her family. It looks like she has a very supportive husband. She's got supportive children. So she's got a husband that's behind her and children are behind her, and I think that that's beautiful.
Okay.
I will say that when we interviewed the county board candidates, there was talk of this sales tax that's going to be in a referendum in the spring. I believe it was 0.75%, Ray, is that correct? Something like that?
Yeah. 3/4 of a penny.
And the money was dedicated strictly to public safety. And the county board candidates talked about the $28 million shortfall in the budget currently. And the idea that if the referendum doesn't pass, they've got a shortfall and they're going to have to make some serious decisions. Do you support the referendum at this point? Obviously, it's not up until the spring, bless you. And do you, if it doesn't pass and you win this election, you have an obligation then to work with the county board to maybe reduce employees or other aspects of the office. Where do you see yourself in that process?
Well, that's a great question. And there's probably about 3 or 4 in there. So let me try to tackle that. Number one, I'm not afraid to use the big scissors. You know, I've done that as a general counsel for an organization that had a huge budget, and we would often sit down and have to cut certain things that we want to do. Whenever I would go to cutting, it would never be at the expense of public safety. But you know what I got to tell you, Pat? Public safety is a beautiful word.
Sure.
Like the Safety Act. Everybody loves to say public safety. So if I say no to it, it sounds like I'm like I got horns and a tail.
Sure.
You know, Safety Act. If you say no to, well, you want to have safety, it sounds like you got horns and a tail. You know, the devil's in the detail. You know, and what is the Safety Act? What is the referendum funding when it talks about public safety? You know, I submit to you and to your listeners and watchers that the budgets are bloated all over the county. You know, the reason they're in a shortfall, again, now I'm a Republican candidate, so I'm much more fiscally conservative maybe than other people may be. And I think you need somebody like that in the room. You know, you have a state that's run by one party and they're spending out the ears. You know, and whose money are they spending? Yours and yours and yours and mine.
If I may, though,
Yes.
and I brought this up here with the county board chair and her opponent, the tax rate for the county has dropped the last 4 years. It hasn't increased at all. I'm not suggesting, I'm not challenging your answer at all. I'm just simply saying, raising the question for you to answer. Has the county been diligent with their budgets, pandemic and afterwards, up to this particular point in time?
Well, whenever I hear the word shortfall, then I obviously think that there's something wrong. I mean, you don't plan a shortfall. You do things that cause a shortfall. So I'm not going to say I want a shortfall. I plan things. As far as the tax rates, there's the variables that are used to determine taxes, and those have changed a lot over the years. They've changed. So is really the tax rate change, or are we changing the variables? I mean, there's a system bill, I think it's 33%, it goes back and forth. I mean, so they do some crazy stuff with those numbers. So I'm not sure.
And if I may,
Sure.
I know this full well because we did it at the city of St. Charles for a while too, and that is they froze the levy. Not this chair, but the previous year froze the levy. Well, when you do that, you leave a lot of money on the table. And so shortfalls, I suppose, can occur. Pat, in the previous interview, talked about bringing the state's attorneys here in Kane County up to par with other counties. And so admittedly, there's been expenditures in that particular budget to bring the lawyers, the prosecutors, in a competitive mode with the DuPage County prosecutors and the Lake County prosecutors, etc. I just throw that in there as a...
But we also talked about the difference between DuPage County and Kane County in terms of revenue. So they have a little more money.
Lawyers go somewhere.
Yeah.
Lawyers go somewhere.
The other thing that's compounding this issue, gentlemen, that I see, at least when I'm reading, and again, I'm not an expert, so please, when it talks about county referendums and tax things, I know enough to be at least informed. But there's a lot of concerns also about the population of the county going down. If you saw that, the last census, there's a significant number of people moving out. Either they're not saying that they're here. We're also getting an influx of people who are undocumented. So you have expenses coming from undocumented individuals. That's another whole subject. It's probably a can of worms, and we're not going to go down this conversation, but I'd be happy to come back and give you my true thoughts on that. But the bottom line on that is that there's issues going on with Aurora. I think the population went down, but it's gone down. So when you have monies and you have shortfalls of people and you don't have a lot of income, you're going to have some deficits. So go ahead.
No, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about is I think you're telling us that you're going to look at the budget when you get in. That's certainly something that anybody would do. Have you had occasion to look at the staffing in the office as it's currently managed in terms of supervisors and supervisors per capita or per assistant state's attorney? Obviously you were a supervisor when you were with the state's attorney in Kane County. You understand what that role is, but can an office have too many?
Oh, yeah.
Have you looked at this office? Do you have an opinion about it?
Yeah, I've not looked at deep dive on it. Again, that would be something I would do. A lot of these records are not something that's easy to get. I could FOIA them and get these things. But to be honest with you, a lot of other things are going on. But what I will tell you is I've heard, as well, and I've seen, and I've seen a bloated, administrative staff, and also staff of supervising attorneys. It can be much leaner, and we saw it when we were in the state's attorney's office. You don't want to sound like your dad, like, well, remember the old days. But I mean, there's a lot of good things that happened in those days that we could model and that they could learn from. And when you see a lot of these people going through it, you don't have a lot of that institutional knowledge, which I will bring back to that office to make the place leaner and efficient. Efficiency is what it's about. It's not about paying people that you like or providing opportunities. You got to have some of that growing in there. You got to have people ability to climb the ladders and get up to the ranks. But a bloated administrative staff and a bloated supervisory staff does not serve the public well. And that's what you're trying to do, serve the public. I want to see prosecutors get paid good wages. I do. I'm much in favor of that. I think when I was there, it was horrible too.
I can concur.
Yeah. I mean, I had some real trouble raising family with the salary that you have. So it's deplorable. And you want to make sure people have a good wage and a good living wage. But it doesn't come by keep asking for more money and then building programs and asking for, and next thing you got an $18 million budget and it was formally 10, and in 3.5 years, I mean, you got to take a breath here and back up and say, we need some priorities. My priorities is to take care of the staff, that are doing work for prosecution, which is what the charter is that I'm doing. Pay these prosecutors that have been there for a long time, that are experienced, that have the knowledge and the ability to do the cases. Give them the money they deserve to do.
Right.
The Safety Act, which you alluded
Yes, sir.
to, and we said we were going to talk about it. Full disclosure, Pat and I, for the better part of a year prior to the passage of that act, on these podcasts, railed against the proposal. We didn't hide our thoughts. We were emotional about it, and we thought it was bad law. The current state's attorney said the same thing in her interview.
Today.
No, she not today. She said that at the time it was proposed, she wanted the record to say it was bad law.
Well, I can show you other than that.
Well, let me just say to you that quoting today now, the fact that you had a Daily Herald article came out, and State's Attorney Reinert in Lake County, State's Attorney Berlin in DuPage County, State's Attorney Masser here in Kane County, all said it's much better than we expected. Number one, I'd make that point as a generality.
Are they all up for re-election?
Well, Masser is. I don't know about the other two.
I think they all are.
Oh, that may be what we be. Then I come across this mailing.
We're going to
by,
let you get to your point.
I come across this mailing by Representative Ugasti, who says the implementation of the Pretrial Fairness Act, which went into effect in September of 23, has sparked significant concern among citizens and law enforcement. The act had left communities vulnerable and undermined the authority of the courts to hold dangerous criminals accountable for their crimes. He quotes no statistics at all in the memo about whether crime is up in Kane County, down in Kane County, level in Kane County. I offer you a chance to react to all of that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that question. I probably have 2 days to talk about that. Number one, Dan Ugasti, great representative, always has a good thing to say. So when I hear him saying that, I respect what he's saying because he obviously might not have the statistical data, but he obviously looked at it. So let me talk about my own position on this. I think the Safety Act is horrible law. And it was passed in the middle of the night, which tells you a lot right there. Without any prosecutors or any people that were really in law enforcement even looking at it. When I don't want somebody to do something, I used to hand my paper and I would hand it in like nobody's looking because you don't want anybody to see it. But as soon as it gets under a microscope, it's Swiss cheese all over the place. Now let me back away and say this. My opponent has been on the record saying she supports the Safety Act, and then she's been on saying that it's bad law, and then so I don't really know.
That was before it was created.
Yeah,
I don't, to be clear.
And I
think, we can watch the tape. That's
Sure.
what she said.
If I may, if I'm correct, I think she was against it with Sheriff Kane originally, and then they became in favor of it.
Yeah, I think so. Well, here's what I know, and I don't want to speak for my opponent because I don't know what's in her brain. But what I could tell you is this: the Safety Act is bad law, and the moment I come into the office, with God's will and grace, if I get to be your next Kane County State's Attorney, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call the governor's office and ask to put a moratorium on the Safety Act. We do it on other laws that are bad. So what I say is, why practice on our time? The state's attorney, I've heard her say that there's problems with it and we need to correct it. We've had 2 codicils already. These are called, what do they call them, bills that are coming back in after that there's a problem and they keep trying to fix something. It's back in the days, like my mother used to say, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. So they're trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and they continue to do these things. And these little fixes they have are still a problem. Now, let me tell you why it's a problem. I don't agree completely with Mr. Gasti's statement because it said something about the end result. This is pre-trial. We're talking about really the Pretrial Fairness Act, which was only one component of the Safety Act. There's so many of them, and so many of them are bad. But this is just one bad element of it. And this bad element says this: in order to reduce racism, which we all want, we don't want racism in our system. I think it disgusts me. Racism disgusts me. And also holding anybody who's different, LGBTQ, or if you're non-binary and you're treating somebody different because of anything other than the facts and the law and criminal acts, it disgusts me. Mm-hmm. And we see it sometimes, but is this law something that's going to correct it? Well, number one, if you go to Cook County, and I don't know the statistics, so you're going to say, well, what about the statistics? Statistics, where they can say anything they want. But if you look at the statistics, I believe in Cook County, it's not really solving that issue. There's still an inordinate amount of, a disproportionate amount of black and brown people that are being charged and incarcerated than non-black and brown people. You look at now, this is a Cook County law. It might be great for Cook County. So put a moratorium on 101 counties around the state and let Cook County continue this law. We have other laws that just say it's only good for 1 million and above, so it means it's Cook County. Why not do it for this law? And here's why I'm telling you, I've never seen our jails, disproportionate with black or brown people. In Kane County, and I've been watching these things. I didn't see DuPage County. I don't see Joe Davis County. I don't see Ogle County. I don't see the 60 other counties. I never saw these problems that people are creating like this is a big problem. And here's the problem with this to begin with is when you have a safety act and you take away bail, it destroys the system. And let me tell you why. This is my own thing, so bear with me for a second. When they had cash bail, a person would get arrested and they would get cash bail. Let's say it's an indigent person without a lot of money and they burglarized a building and the judge says $5,000 bond. You need to post 5%, 10% of that $500. Oh, I don't have $500. Go to jail. The person would go to jail. Then they would have a lawyer, which is, again, a constitutional. Gosh, wow, the United States Constitution provides for a lawyer. They get a free lawyer. The lawyer comes in and talks to that individual. They say, I got to get out of here. The lawyer files maybe another bond motion with a different judge. The judge now reduces it maybe to $2,500. So $2,500 or $250 they need. They still say, I don't have enough money. Well, here's what's going to happen. Then they're going to come to me as the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and say, can we work this out? Can we now put a plea through? He'll admit to his guilt on this. He'll get a sentence. He'll be held accountable for his behavior, and he goes on his way, and the case is done. Right now what happens is the guy gets out, you can't find him, you got to first, some judges will say issue a summons, the summons goes out there, they can't find the guy, he comes back, now you got a warrant out, the guy comes back and the warrant says I'm not going to do it again, they go back, and you can't even rearrest him on a technical violation, it has to be a new violation, so they're encouraging this. It's insane. Is
it regressive though? I guess that's a simple economics question.
Regressive in what way, sir?
Against the poor.
Is what, the act or bail regressive?
Bail.
Okay.
I think that anything that it would be regressive if there wasn't anything that was available to them beyond this. But there's alternatives. The system is fraught before the Safety Act, fraught with abilities to go back and contest the bail. Again, to have a public defender to work the case out. It's not regressive.
But we would concede, just a point, we would concede that a rich person is no problem.
Well, a rich person has also the ability to get a great lawyer. So we're going to say
that.
Everybody only needs to get a public defender. I'm sorry,
exactly.
It's not fair.
Of course,
it's not fair.
That's why I asked the question of whether it's regressive or not.
So I say to you, so if you got a lot of money, the guy's got a lot of money. Let's make a law that says this. This is the new Safety Act, Safety Act 2. If you got a lot of money, you can't use that money to buy a lawyer. You got to get a public defender because it's not fair to everybody else. So we're all going to get public defenders. You're all going to be treated equally. There are some things in the system.
Nothing wrong with everybody being treated equally, is there?
No, there's not. But again, I mean, it would be bad if that was the way we're treating people equally by saying we're going to take away something that you have the ability to do. It's a cost benefit.
I think I may have misspoke. I think that Sheriff Hayne and Jamie Mosser were in favor of it. Then they became opposed to it. I don't know if I said that the opposite before. Just, I want to clarify.
I know that, and she said prior to the act being passed, this you can roll the tape.
Right. She
said that she was against the Safety Act. Period.
Yeah.
She said that, and then, and she quoted the article now is with Berlin and Riker in support of segments of it. You have to read the article.
I'm not the guest here, so I won't testify.
Moving along.
But anyways, but the problem is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that people are being released without bond and reoffending. Now, that's not necessarily a problem in Kane, but in DuPage and Cook, There are people that have been released on multiple charges reoffending, and that's the issue. But that presupposes that they have a bond and they're kept. I think the problem that they were trying to avoid is these people sitting in custody for months and months and months on $1,000 or $500. You remember in Kane, we used to have people go to the jail and work out something on a bond.
That's what I'm saying.
Not necessarily a plea bargain.
Very
but
efficient, very
yeah.
efficient. That you can have this justice can be very efficient. Sometimes it was a plea bargain. Sometimes it was moving that person out, and they had that ability to do that. You can't do that anymore.
Well, Cook County is a whole different
It's
animal.
a whole different animal.
And so you're right. Maybe it should be treated as a different
Moving
animal.
to the idea of the state's attorney working with all the various law enforcement agencies here in the county, with the local municipal police officers, and of course the sheriff's office. We, as you know, we recently had a flap. It became somewhat public between the mayor of Aurora and the sheriff here in the county.
Very sad.
Thank you for saying that. I agree that it was sad that something like that came to a public light. When in 8 years as mayor, I became attuned to at least our police chief working well with a couple different state's attorneys here in Kane, working very well, and discussing the fact that it's incumbent upon a good partnership to exist between state's attorney's office and the police department and all the police departments working together. Please comment, if you will, to whatever length you want to comment on that whole concept, because to me, that's crucial.
Oh, the number one. I mean, you are, as the chief prosecutor for the county, you are employed by the county. They're electing you and they're employing you to work with law enforcement to enforce the law. So if you have bad relationships with police, it's going to be damaging to people in the community. That could be victims. It also could be defendants. It's everybody. So you need a absolutely rock solid relationship. But you also need this, Ray. You need to be independent. The best prosecutors are the prosecutors who are independent from law enforcement. They don't represent law enforcement. They don't work for law enforcement. They work for the people of the county of Kane. And when the relationship between law enforcement and the state's attorney's office gets too symbiotic, if you will, and it becomes controlled, like we have right now, I would submit to you, with the state's attorney and the sheriff, there could be bad results. And the reason I'm saying that is, now you say, well, what data do you have? You know, my opponent, I don't know if you knew this or saw this, but gave $10,000 to Sheriff Haynes' reelection campaign. Now, if I gave you $10,000, we would have a good relationship with each other, and maybe some would say it's a little bit too close. You know, and what ends up happening is that's what's happening. When you have this Aurora situation, I submit to your ladies and gentlemen out here that are listening is this. How is that person going to be fair in adjudicating a dispute between Aurora and the sheriff's department, which they're going to have to in a situation, because they're the investigators, they're major crimes task force is investigating it. It's led by the state's attorney's office. Do you think that there's going to be a fair result? Now, my opponent would say, "Oh, absolutely, I'm beyond reproach." Well, I could say I'm the president of the world. I mean, I could say anything I want. The proof is in $10,000 that's being given to the sheriff. You know, the other thing is, I want to shove this in here a little bit. In Elgin, a young black man was shot and killed. I don't know if you saw this. A young black man was shot and killed in Elgin. And he was shot and killed by a civilian, but the civilian happened to be an off-duty sheriff's deputy. And the next morning, before an investigation even took place, the sheriff's on the WGN and all over the news saying, he's a hero. He shot and killed this guy. We don't even know the evidence. And the sheriff's already saying the hero. Now the state's attorney, who she gave $10,000 to, is the one that's going to be investigating that. Do you think that there's going to be anything looked at? Again, if I gave you $10,000, would you look at me a little bit nicer than if I didn't?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that she would or would not. I don't want to pass judgment on that, but you made your point, I suppose.
And I believe the state's attorney has the capacity to bring in the state police or somehow recuse themselves from the investigation.
So I submit right now to the state's attorney, we need to get an independent investigator on any situation that is controversial that's involving the sheriff's and her office, because the people of this county deserve better, and they deserve independence, not somebody that's beholden to a certain political position. And that's when my mantra I say in my campaign, it says, take politics out of the office. This is a typical example. We can't have political stuff. Does that mean I'm not going to work with the sheriff? I can't wait to work with the sheriff. I can't wait to work with Elgin, Aurora, St. Charles, all the police departments. But no one's going to control me. The people of the state of Illinois will elect me, and I will represent them.
Well, we want to, A, give you an opportunity to tell the viewers your website again, and then B, we want you to take this opportunity to speak directly to the consumer here, the viewer, just a couple of guy audience, and tell them why they should vote for you.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a very good interview, and I appreciate your questions. My name is Andrew Sosnowski. My website is sosnowskiforkane.com. I want to tell you that I'm not a newcomer. You know, I'm an older man. I'm 64 years old. I've been around the block, and I am asking to be your next Kane County State's Attorney. I'm asking you to entrust me with the ability to be fair, number one. And I'm all about social justice, so don't let anything I say make you think that I'm not for social justice. I believe we need to give people opportunities to make mistakes and then be good about trying to correct those mistakes so they don't do it again. You know, when my kids would make a mistake, you know, the first time I would punish them. People need that, and then they would learn. If they didn't, you'd do something else. It's very similar with population of criminals and criminal behavior. You just need to hold people accountable. I am the state's attorney that is not afraid to hold anybody accountable. You know, I'm not beholden to anybody but you, the citizens of Kane County. Again, I don't ask to look at red or blue or all this stuff going on in politics. I'm a very independent-minded man. I think very independently. I'm not somebody that's going to be controlled by any political thoughts or ideas. I'm a guy that wants to be your state's attorney. I want to do this for you. I want to do it for my family. I want to do it for your family, for your children, for your communities. And I promise you that you will have my undivided attention on that for the next 4 years if you allow me to do that.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.